So my presentation is called Weaving It Together, the Warp and Weft of Programming and Instruction. And what I really want to talk about is often we think of programming and instruction as two very different threads within libraries. So I'm in an academic library right now, but I'm curious, show of hands, in your libraries, different library types, do you have different people doing those two things? Do you have different budgets for those two things? Do you have different resources for those two things? Like, how many of you have separate channels for programming and instruction? No hands? Okay, well, maybe this won't be that revolutionary, but that's okay. So in my experience, we're a very small library. We have 4 or 5 full-time people, and we all do a lot of everything. But I'm going to talk about a really positive experience I had blending these together. So for the last 7 or 8 years, I've run a weekly club called Much Ado About Knitting. My director came up with this punny title. So I'm a knitter, and it's generally a fiber arts club. If I were to go back, I would rename it to be more inclusive, but it's knitting, and it's every week, and it's open to the entire Simon's Rock community. So we have an academy, which is 9th and 10th grade, which is high school. And we have college, which is freshmen through seniors. And then all of the faculty and staff are also welcome. So over the years, it's changed a little bit in terms of attendance and who I get when. For a while, it was mostly seniors. This year, I get a lot of first years. In the early days, it was very heavy on faculty and staff, but now it's mostly students. And I also shared a screenshot of when we were over Zoom. So I did it on Zoom during that period, and I had used the whiteboard to like explain how to knit. So I found this in the archive of my Google Drive, and I thought that that was kind of a fun relic. So the club had been happening and everyone knows about it, and I've become known as the knitter, which is cliche, and that's fine. So in January, we offer a J-term for our academy students. It's a required 3-week program that they do. And so I had an opportunity to pitch a class. And so I did Much Ado About Knitting, the class. And it was very well attended and well enrolled. There were 17 high school students. And if any of you are crafty people or makers, the thought of teaching 17 teenagers how to do a craft, like, so for me, this was a way to take something that I'd been doing for fun as a club in a more casual, optional setting and turn it into a formal class for credit that the high school students would take in January. And I was really excited about this because some of the benefits of doing programming and a club is that it's optional, it's casual, it's very low stakes. There's a lot of community building that happens organically because you have all these people in the same space, especially for something like knitting or a craft that you're doing where a lot of our introverts or people who are neurodivergent or don't want to engage in a very active way, you can work on your own thing and kind of be focused on your own thing, but still get the community aspect of it. So I was looking forward to translating a lot of the elements that I'd been doing in the club into a more formal class. So as I said, it was really popular, 17 kids. I was like, what did I sign up for? What are we getting into? How's this going to be? And I can honestly say I applied for this conference like right after it ended, and I was very much on the high of the success of it. It was one of the best teaching experiences I've ever had, and I've been teaching for over a decade. So it was so much fun. So how does this relate to information literacy and instruction and libraries? What I think is really cool and what I experienced as success teaching a class around a craft is that you can embed information literacy skills into other things that we do. So when you have something, so in this case, knitting, it's something that students are interested in, but you can teach them all of these other information literacy skills and practices. So for example, most of these kids had never touched needles or fiber, didn't know anything. And so they immediately had to do research. I was one person. I did rope in some people in the first few days. So the middle picture was when our marketing team came, and I was teaching them how to wind balls of yarn from skeins, which is like the most tedious, boring first step. And that made our promotion. But so quick aside in terms of promotion, it ended up on all of our social media channels, in the weekly newsletter to the entire Simon's Rock community. So it was excellent, just de facto publication for the library. But because none of them had done any of this before, they had to do research. So right off the bat, they're learning how to find sources, different types of sources, evaluating sources. So what makes a good tutorial? What makes someone credible to teach this thing? And by credible, I just mean, do they know what they're talking about, or are they making it up? Like, is the thing they're saying actually going to work? How do you know? So they're vetting sources, they're finding sources. We were also learning about different types of sources and where to find them. So different formats, videos, blogs, Social media, Ravelry, any Ravelry people in the house? Okay, so Ravelry is an entire social media community just for the fiber arts. So within that, all the information is categorized. So metadata, cataloging, indexing. We got to talk about that and tagging in social media and how that overlaps with the library world. We also got to talk about citing sources and giving credit. So I had two, in addition to knitting, so they learned how to knit, and most of them walked away with a product or partway to a product. But there were also two assignments. One was what I called a collaborative resource list, which was just an annotated bibliography that they all worked on as a group. And the other was an oral presentation, which I wanted to do an oral presentation because I liked the idea of, historically, fiber arts were a very feminine thing in like small community spaces. And when you think of like oral traditions and skills that are passed down, that's what I was trying to imitate with an oral presentation. In the end, we had to switch to Zoom for reasons. And they did their presentations on Zoom, which also worked really well because then they got to bring in images and share websites. And so that also worked well. But in the presentations, I had them pick any topic that they wanted to do related to the fiber arts. And their topics were so cool. Like they did everything from the popularity of silk scarves and it paralleling the rise of aviation. Like I never would have included that or covered that in my class, but kids wanted to learn about it. They wanted to learn about different fiber. They wanted to learn about how it was made. Some kid who's like a comp sci person did a whole graph with like fiber content and popularity and which fibers are better for producing which types of garments. Like they got so deep into it because I gave them the opportunity to pick the thing that they were excited about and just go forth and research. And they brought in, you know, their research skills in terms of what sources are they using? Are they vetting them? How are they acknowledging that it's not their own work? What connections are they making between the different sources that they're using? What else? We talked about copyright. So when you have a fiber arts or things like cookbooks and cooking, these tangible things, there's a lot of conversations that can be had around copyright. What is something that gets passed down? Who has ownership of it? How does it change? How do you acknowledge and cite those things? So this really provided a way to talk about a lot of the things that I teach in my traditional standard information literacy skills, but in a way that was immediately relevant and valuable to the topic that they were interested in. Like they signed up because they wanted to learn about knitting, and then I hit them with library science. So another cool aspect of this program, so on the top left, we have an alum who owns a fiber art store in our town. So, and then the bottom, or I guess the two right photos, I invited her for a day and we made pom-poms. So it was a way to activate and engage our alumni community, have them learn about resources in town, learn about a different angle of fiber arts and making. So there's really the like community engagement, which the last presentation was talking about. I was also able to bring into the class in terms of leveraging experts within our community and also just exposing them to other people. Because whenever you're learning a skill or a craft, one person's not the expert, right? Like we all know different things. So engaging people to the widest amount of sources and people available, I think is the best course of action. What else? So what are the benefits of this kind of work? So for me, I think it's really exciting to think holistically about the roles that we play in libraries and what we're how we're serving our communities, and not thinking of these in very neat channels, but thinking about how they can get woven together. So the thing's covering the thing. Okay, so I feel that when you provide something that is immediately relevant or interesting to a person, they're going to learn it more and pay attention to it more when there's an immediate need or they're trying to solve a thing that they care about. So making it relevant, tangible, like actually what they want to do, which often in academia, you think that they're there because they want to be there, but then they're like, oh, okay, I have to write this paper. But when they're learning a thing that they want to learn, and then they're learning all these other skills, it ties it to something that feels meaningful and valuable, and they're more likely to pay attention, care, remember, all of that. It's also a really cool way to highlight your print and digital collections and any other resources that you have. So before I talked about the alum that I brought in, so that's an example of like a community resource. I will confess, I've worked there for 8 years, and one of my fellow librarians did the display. I didn't know we had an extensive knitting collection. Like, that's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed to admit that, but I can admit it. And we did a display, and it was the most popular display for the time that, like, we have like 4 or 5 displays at a time. During that rotation, that was the most popular one. So And we unearthed a section of her collection that I didn't know about, and now we're going to add to. So it was a cool way to promote that. And then also digital collections. So I showed them Library of Congress, Internet Archive, other places where there are digitized archival patterns. So talking about how digital collections work, how you can find this stuff. There's also a lot of museums that have knitting patterns and knitting information. One of the prompts I gave them for their oral presentations was they could do like knitting in art or photographs of knitting. There's a lot of really cool historic photographs of knitting from different cultures. So I got to show them about like digital collections and how they work. So highlighting collections is another cool way in for a project like this. It's also a way to create community. So I was kind of joking that I unleashed the knitters on campus because so many of them, there were 17. We have about 400 students total, so that's a lot of students. Then they're all knitting in all the spaces on campus. They're knitting in their classes. They're knitting with their friends. So like I unleashed the knitters, and they found people within the community that had shared interests and shared challenges, and they were learning, like leaning to each other to get help. So it was a really cool way to create community about something related to libraries, but separate than libraries. It's also, I think, and so you can see that we're actually using what's called our periodical section, where we have couches and it's a much more casual space. Normally classes and info-lit sessions are in a classroom, right? They're in like a formal space that like it's marked by, we're entering the space, we're learning about this like academic thing. By having my class in the like comfortable, loungy, casual part of the library, it created a comfort and a familiarity with the library that people knew that we could talk about fun, you know, less serious topics. I'm putting in quotes because I think knitting is serious, but like less serious topics while also engaging intellectually with the things that we care about and are passionate about. And by having the class in the library, it's inviting them in and giving them ownership of a physical space. So I'm sure that every library saw a decline in usage, like coming back from COVID. Like we have not seen our students engage with our space in the way that they did pre-COVID. But by having the class there and knowing that they can show up whenever they want to do this activity and this craft in the space, I think has really been an asset in terms of reintroducing them to what we're about. And also for the creating community point. So a through line I noticed with the club and with the class and just my work in general, the more opportunities you have to meet people where they are and to engage with them on shared interests, the more likely that they're then later to come ask me for help on a paper, the more likely that they're going to come ask me when they need to cite something or when they need to find a source for their paper that's due the next day. So like knowing who I am as a whole person means that they're more likely to come ask me for help and they're less intimidated by me as a librarian. Two other points I didn't add to my slide that I wanted to mention. I think it's really good too when you're kind of intersecting the roles of librarianship and you're doing programming and instruction and outreach and community building all together, is you break down these kind of false barriers between patron and librarian or teacher and student. When you're learning a craft together, you're on the same learning journey, right? Like we look stuff up just as much as we help other people look it up, but often we get put as the expert and that like there's this false kind of binary of like, we know the thing and they don't know the thing. And that's why they're coming to help us. And what I like about creating shared spaces when you're learning together is that we're modeling what we want them to be doing, which is when you don't know, you look something up. When you have a source, you evaluate it. How do you evaluate it? Here's how I evaluate it. So when they see us doing it, they're more likely to learn and pick up on those things than when we're just like preaching or talking at them about how to do it, in my opinion. And then the other thing, and this is kind of a thing that I've been on about lately, academia particularly is really about the mind and the intellect and the head. And that is really great, but that's only one part of us. And so I'm really invested in creating opportunities for students and my colleagues to have ability, like opportunities and ways to engage their heart and their hands. So making, doing things you care about. I think that the more that we connect all of those things, we're educating the whole student, we're creating work environments for the whole person, and we're really connecting all the parts of ourselves to be like whole, well, happy people in the world. So that's like my personal mission with all of this, but I think that providing spaces for us to engage on all of the levels of who we are and how we learn is really, really a cool thing. So I don't know how much time I have left, but I thought for the last part, excellent. So I thought for the last part, it would be fun if we brainstormed. I'm curious if we can think about what programming are you already doing at your library? that can be infused with some information literacy instruction? And or alternatively, what information literacy instruction are you already doing that can be turned into programming? And these are not rhetorical questions. Like, I actually want to have a conversation.